So we have a clip from Genius. Actually, I think it's the trailer, but it's a particularly good trailer because I think it gives a sense of the whole sweep of the movie. But perhaps you'd just, for people who haven't seen it, Carol just said it's about Maxwell Perkins and Thomas Wolfe, but perhaps you could explain a little more the nature of their relationship.
Certainly. I'll try to. Maxwell Perkins, at the end of the 1920s, was the leading editor at Scribner's and Sons here in New York. Prompt me if I go wrong here, by the way.
That's good.
And a manuscript came across his desk, which took him a weekend to read through, at the end of which he felt he had discovered a new American literary great. And he embarked on a relationship with Thomas Wolfe as his editor, that brought these two men together on an extraordinary journey, both as collaborators, as friends, as surrogate father and son, and indeed drew them both away from the female relationships that they were in. And it's an investigation really of the creative process of editing a book and writing a book. It looks at the essence of what genius is. Is genius in collaboration? Is it in the hands of one man or another? Can someone be a genius of friendship? Can someone be just a genius of collaboration? And it's also an opportunity to look at, certainly from a British point of view, the life of these two great men who seem to have slipped somewhat into history's shadows.
Let's look at the clip. So I think we can watch it. So that wasn't the trailer after all, but I think it's well chosen, and it gets at the heart of their relationship. And I have to say that this is a movie that I brought a lot of personal interest to, because as they mentioned, I've spent much more of my life as an editor, indeed as a fiction editor, than I have as a writer. And it always seemed to me that editors were somewhat unsung. There aren't many movies about editors. In fact, I think this is only the second. And the first one, as I mentioned to Jude in the green room, the only other movie I know about an editor is Wolf. And if you remember, with Jack Nicholson as an editor, but we don't actually get to see him do any editing because his main job is being a werewolf. But it interests me. The movie is based on a very good biography by Scott Berg, biography of Maxwell Perkins, that came out about 30 years ago. And so I'm curious, so that it takes all this time for someone to screw up the courage or the interest to make a movie about these two people. And it's curious to me that when it happens, it's a British theater director that does it. The movie is directed by Michael Grandage, who, in case people here don't know, he's easily the greatest British theater director of his generation. But this is his first movie.
That's right.
So I'm curious, he could have, do you know, what was it?
Yeah, I understand that the order of events went like this. Scott obviously wrote the biography of Maxwell Perkins called Maxwell Perkins, Editor of Genius. I believe John Logan, our brilliant screenwriter, Academy Award-winning screenwriter, I believe, playwright too, yeah, who had worked with Michael. So there was a relationship there. They did work together on Red, which I believe was performed here. John read the book, read Scott's book, and really pleaded with him to have a chance to write the screenplay. That happened almost 10, 15 years ago, I believe, really? That long. The script was then, as many great scripts are, as you may well know, sort of passed around Hollywood like a volleyball. I believe it landed. It was a brilliant screenplay, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be made immediately. There was obviously it was a subject matter that wasn't immediately commercial. So it was, as I said, it was passed around Hollywood. I believe it landed in various directors' laps and was either looked at or investigated to be made, was never made, which again happens all the time. Along that journey, it picked up the interest of Colin Firth. And Colin, if you see it, recognized, I think, not a kindred spirit, but something in Maxwell Perkins that he really felt he had a handle on. So he was attached. And I think eventually the rights went back to John Logan, and he at this stage was obviously, it was a passion piece, and was just very keen to have it made. And Michael and he, having collaborated, he knew that Michael was just interested to finally direct a film and was looking and reading scripts. This landed on his script, and finally it happened.
I was wondering, and I guess we'd need to ask Michael, but it struck me that he may have been interested in part because the job of being a director is not dissimilar from the job of being an editor, right?
I think he was curious. I think he recognized that there was, first of all, it was a piece about performance. It was a piece, not to limit it, but it was a piece. It's a domestic piece. It takes place in rooms and offices, and is very much about the spoken word. So I think for a theatre director, dipping his toe into the medium of film for the first time, it felt that it was an area he was experienced in and could bring his experience to. But you're right, and I've spent the day doing Q&As with him, so I can quote him quite succinctly in this. I know that he recognized in their relationship, of a creative, they're both creative men. He recognized, I suppose, the collaboration between someone who is taking a sort of creative expression, a creative purge, if you like, and somehow steering, administering guidance and percolating it into a more refined state. And indeed, the piece raises that question. I think it's not just, obviously, on one level, it's very much a piece about the great works of Thomas Wolfe and what it took to put them on the page and indeed in the shops. But it's equally about the collaboration of creative minds and what is it, and where does genius exist in that?
So what attracted you to this?
Michael Grandage. I'd just finished, I'd played Hamlet for him, and I'd played Henry V for him. And when he said he was busy putting together this film, I was really curious to know how this hugely experienced and adept theatre director was going to take to the medium of film. And I remember he would come and talk to me during the run of Henry V in my dressing room towards the end of the run, and was always talking about various actors who could play Thomas Wolfe. And I remember after a few weeks thinking, he still hasn't asked me to read this script. What have I done wrong? And eventually it was almost, I think I actually saw the night where he was sort of talking about this actor and then kind of thought, maybe you should read it. And he let me read it. And so yes, in truth, I didn't really know who Thomas Wolfe was. And like many people, I assumed he'd written Bonfire of the Vanities. And I was just very excited about wearing white suits and Panama hats and, no, I didn't really. But I was excited because Michael was involved, and I thought, here's a man who I felt very, very safe in his hands and taken on some pretty meaty parts with and come out feeling fulfilled and really happy with the experience. And then through John Logan's wonderful screenplay, I was introduced to the world of Thomas Wolfe, this extraordinary character. And on the page, it was clear here was an enormous character to sink one's teeth into. Ebullient and lecherous and drunken and loud, but brilliant and driven, motivated. I mean, it literally jumped off the page, and my first questions were always, are we sure he was this big, he was this loud? And my only concern was that he was apparently 6'7", and I'm 5'11" if I'm lucky, when I stand up really straight, But of course, the scale of the man was very much in the piece, in the heart of what John Logan had captured from what he knew of Wolfe, and so that's where it all started. Yeah. Did you
eventually read Wolfe? He's not read much in this country anymore, I don't think.
I believe he was dropped from the syllabus in the 70s, possibly because of I've heard because of certain racist elements of his writing. and has kind of drifted out of...
Well, and the writing is also, I mean, the writing is like the personality, and you see this in the movie. It's huge,
Yeah.
and it's not to everyone's taste.
No, quite. I did, because apart from anything, it was, I think if you're playing a writer, you have to be familiar with the works. But also, fortunately, a huge amount of his writing is biographical, and so there's this mine of detailed insight into who he was, how he felt. I mean, starting literally from birth. I mean, I think the opening chapter of Look Homeward Angel takes place in his mother's womb, right. And proceeds from there.
It's too bad that the clip we saw doesn't show what you do with this part. I mean, which seems to me to perfectly kind of characterize his writing. It's your portrayal. It's big. It's exuberant. It's verges ever so. It's almost out of control, but
yes.
not. And as you say, he's a drunk. He's sentimental. He's lecherous, full of feelings, uncontrolled. Is that a hard kind of character to play? How do you do that without becoming yourself too much of a muchness?
You have to. Again, you have to trust your director, I think, because we were fortunate to have time to rehearse, but you're aware of the piece as a whole and the scale, if you like, or the touchstones that you want to reach at any given time in the performance, which, given a part like Thomas Wolfe or a man like Thomas Wolfe, are broad. You want to go from... There are scenes where he will cry one minute and be ecstatically happy on the next, literally the toss of a coin. So you're suddenly looking at the spectrum of these characters and thinking about, gosh, okay, well, I think I can map this and I can get there emotionally. A lot of it is about releasing the emotional handbrake that one normally conducts oneself with and really pouring yourself into it physically. But the reason I refer back to having a director you can trust is because personally, the one voice I always had was, "God, is this too much? Am I overdoing it?" But of course, if you're a director with an objective point of view and you need a scene to carry the characters around him in certain directions or to react in a certain way, the director, of course, is saying, "No, you need to go there, otherwise they're not responding correctly." And what was wonderful about this piece is that at the other extreme, you have Maxwell Perkins, who by all accounts was incredibly contained and considerate and reliable, caught the same train home every night for 30 years, I believe, lived a very tame life. And so I think Michael saw it very much as a not a juggle, but a conducting these two extreme opposites delicately together,
So the other thing that's terrific in this movie, I think, is your Tar Heel accent. How did you get that? It's spectacular.
I worked with a really terrific voice coach, two actually on this film, because the chap I usually work with, Tim Monach, who is just a master at his trade, gave me wonderful recordings that I listened to endlessly, just to get the sort of sounds, and he gives you these brilliant exercises that train the mouth muscles to make shapes that you're just not used to. It's interesting, if you have an accent, your muscles in your mouth are only used to making certain shapes, and you have to train the mouth to take on other shapes. And then Liz Hemmelstein was with us during the filming of Genius, and she was there being my ears every day and tweaking and helping me. Laura Linney, too, is actually from a town very near Asheville, and so having her on set was very helpful.
She plays Perkins' wife.
Perkins' wife. But it's very interesting just to combine both the text of Woolf's books and also the challenge of getting the accent right. I was advised early on to, when practicing the accent, to recite from his literature, and what it enabled you to do was to try and hear how this man spoke. And of course, he famously used barely any punctuation, so his sentences would start and continue until he ran out of breath, and would sometimes also take on, go in completely opposing directions. And it was it was wonderful at times to feel like you could hear him in the room. And I also read a lot of his letters aloud. And again, he would write these pages of letters, and it was a good way to conjure him up.
It wasn't until I agreed to do this and started thinking about meeting you that it suddenly occurred to me that you actually have played a North Carolinian before.
I have.
Inman in Coal Mountain. So was that a help?
It was, yeah. It was a familiar, again, going back to the rather technical discussion of the muscles in one's mouth. It was, yes, it was a sound I'd acquired and one that I'd really enjoyed.
You were able to pick it back up again?
Yeah, I mean, I went back to work from square one because it felt right, because it had been 13 years. Gosh, yeah, 13 years since Coal Mountain. So I started from square one, but it was also a sound that I enjoyed. I haven't always done accents that I particularly enjoyed, but I liked it very much.
We actually have a clip from Coal Mountain, so maybe we take a look at that.
Gosh, I haven't seen that in a long time.
Pretty great. But it must have been an immensely difficult part. I mean, by the end, some of that's makeup, but it's not all makeup. I mean, you have literally been through it, right?
Yeah. It was an interesting experience. It was very well considered by everyone, on the behind the camera, as to how to capture this immense journey and time scale, and they were really considered, led by the wonderful Anthony Minghella, who I know you wanted to talk about tonight. He at the front, he was very considerate of his actors always, and knew that it was vital to capture the different chapters of that story in the correct order. So, we kind of started at the beginning and
filmed it more or less in order.
Well, kind of, in that we certainly filmed all the stuff before the war, when they were sort of young and naive, if you like, and we shot all that first of all, and then I sort of went off on my way and would meet up with Ant, and we'd go off and film over this period. Then we shot the conflict, the sequences in the conflict, and then yes, it was almost like the actors sort of split into two, and Ant would go off and shoot with the women, Nicole and Renee, and everything that happened back at home, and then would go off on the road with me and continue on the sort of the journey of Inman. And yeah, it was grueling. It was for months and months. We started in July and finished at Christmas.
Wow.
Went on.
So what made you want to take that on? Just the sheer challenge of it, or the chance to work with?
Well, Anthony and I had met in the film he did prior to that, and we'd had a really extraordinary experience. That was Talented Mr. Ripley, yeah. And
we have that too. That's what we can.
We're going backwards.
Going backwards.
And he and I struck up a wonderful relationship, and I'm probably stating the obvious. That's what you look for. You look for a director that you can trust, that is going to test you, and but also he's going to catch you and push you, and but ultimately be in the hands of someone who will encourage great work. You hope, and then you look at the subject matter and the content, and in this case, it was this fantastic book, this beautiful book that Anthony had elegantly and exquisitely adapted into a screenplay. And, of course, the part, which, as you rightly mentioned, was just a wonderful challenge. The thing I loved about Inman that always made me laugh, and again, going back to accents, whilst I did work very hard on that accent, I barely said a word in the whole film. Because he's suffering from this injury, right, and also because he's on his own for most of the time. Right. But there was something...
And he's not a talkative guy to
And he's not a chatty bloke. No, he's not. You're absolutely right. He's a man of action, or a few words. And so there was also this wonderful challenge of capturing this man's journey, this emotional scarring, this emotional, spiritual depletion, really, at the hands of conflict and a world that he just saw tearing itself apart through physicality. And that was the challenge, and it was a wonderful one to embark on. It was also fun to be in such extraordinary extremes of nature. We were filming in all different terrains.
Where was it filmed?
We filmed some of it in the swamps of Virginia. We shot the majority of it in Romania, because Anthony was looking for a terrain where, first of all, they have very similar environments, natural environments. But Romania at the time was just coming out of the Ceausescu regime, and Ceausescu had forced most of the Romanians into the cities, and so in fact the countryside was almost untouched. As Anthony said, there were no tattoos of man anywhere, so there were no pylons or roads. And we, my friend Ben, who's here with me, Ben and I shared a little house there. We were the only people with a car in the village. Everyone else had horse and carts, and we were getting milk in a pail every morning that we had to pasteurize, or Ben pasteurized actually. And I mean, it was pretty basic, you know, and there were families still out in the meadows hoeing the crops, you know. Wow.
So how did you meet Minghella in the first place?
The first time I was aware of Anthony was actually through my mother. My mum was a teacher originally, and then decided to take up follow her passion for theatre, and she set up a theatre company, and one of her first plays was A Little Like Drowning, which was one of Anthony's first plays. And she wrote to Anthony and asked for some advice, and him, in his typical embracive and passionate way, invited her over for lunch and talked her through the entire play. And so I remembered then his name, and I remembered seeing the play, and I was familiar with him and his work. And then, I'm embarrassed to say this. I was working with his wife. I was doing this very odd little British film with a Chinese director, and his wife was producing it, and he offered me the part of Dickie Greenleaf in The Talented Mr. Ripley, and he'd just won, I think, 9 Oscars for The English Patient, and I turned down the part. I don't know why. I don't know what I was thinking. I think, if I'm honest, I was like 25 or 6, and I sort of thought it was I thought it was a part that played too much on just good looks, and it wasn't, there wasn't a lot to it. And thank goodness, he came and saw me and sort of talked me through the possibilities in this role. And we embarked on what ended up being a wonderful creative collaboration. We did Ripley, we did Cold Mountain, and then we did his final film before he passed away, Breaking and Entering.
We have a clip from Ripley. Let's look at that.
I'm seeing.
I rewatched this myself the other day, and it occurred to me, in retrospect, there's maybe a tiny bit of Thomas Wolfe in Dickie Greenleaf. He's a jazz musician.
Else said that to me today.
He's exuberant. He's he's a bit of a lech. He's self-centered.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't made that connection. You're the second person who said that today. I think because you tend to leave, as happy as the experience may be. That film was a long time ago now, and I haven't seen these clips in years and years, and so I suppose Dickie was pretty much out of my system, and therefore didn't necessarily make the connections with Thomas Wolfe. But sure, there are characteristics there.
I read somewhere that around the time of this movie, Minghella said about you something like, your greatest obstacle as an actor was your looks, by which he meant, I think, that he worried that you could be typecast only as a leading man, and that people would not know what a very good actor you are, besides being a very good-looking one. It's a nice problem to have, a lot. But has it worked out that way in your career? Do you think have you had to struggle to get out from underneath that, or was it?
It's a very uncomfortable and odd conversation to have in a way, because by discussing it, it's like confirming that I think I'm this incredibly good-looking man. You know what I mean? Although I have to say, looking at that, which I can now at the age of 43, I was very pretty. back then. But you know, like anyone, you wake up and you love your face, you hate your face, your face is your face, and you. I mean, I would also add that, you know, the thing with looks in an acting career is that they, I don't know, you know, there are unconventional looking actors who have fantastic careers because they're unconventional looking. So it's not always a given that, oh, people think you're good looking, therefore you're going to have this wonderful career or not get offered. I think in the end you're found out, and it's therefore what you choose to do and what you deliver. And sure, there was a time when, well, I think turning down that part initially was a perfect example of this. There was a time early on when I thought, oh, I should only do character roles. I should only do really odd, ugly people, so that you know, everyone takes me seriously. And then, of course, you realise that you're kind of, you know, you're cutting your own Achilles heel. Then it's like just get on with it and see what comes your way. But equally, choose wisely and carefully.
I think probably my favorite of your recent movies is Dom Hemingway, and
Lord.
I wish we could have a clip of that.
I'm not surprised you don't. It would be...
Well, especially the opening monologue, maybe.
No, quite.
Well, it's hard to explain, except that you play this kind of second-rate safecracker who gets out of jail, but part of what makes it so wonderful is you seem to be taking terrific pleasure, and you look really seedy in this movie.
Yeah.
You seem really to be enjoying that.
Well, what was lovely was thinking, okay, you know, you've got to create the face of a man who's spent 16 years in prison, who's been drunk for possibly 25 years of his life, and bears the scars of all sorts of, you know, injuries and mistakes and problems. And so sitting with a very talented makeup artist and just looking at how you put all of that on into the face, and without wearing prosthetics, it's fun. Because then you feel like you've got the mask of the character, and once you've got that mask, you disappear into him or her.
The other great thing about this movie is that he has these monologues. That,
Yeah.
I mean, they're like the monologues in a play,
Yeah.
really, more than a movie.
But they reminded me of that, and I think that's something that really appealed to me. You know, he loved the sound of his own voice, and he reminded me of a sort of Falstaffian kind of a drunk who would, and was also, even though he was an uneducated man and not a man who probably read very much, he had a wonderful way with words. And Richard Shepard, who wrote it and directed it, really embraced that type of drunk, and I thought, you know, put some beautiful words together. It was a lot of fun to learn and a lot of fun to play. Yeah.
It too has a wonderful accent.
Well, that's my act. That's where I'm from.
Is that really?
Yeah.
That's your accent?
The one thing I said to Richard was, because at the time I read it, he had kind of got his geography of London wrong. In fact, you know, he had been to London, but he'd set this by sort of looking at a map and didn't realize, anyway, and I kept saying, no, if this guy's from here, he can't go there, and he would never, you know. So we went back, and I took him to the part of London I grew up, southeast London, and I grew up in an area called Lewisham, but we decided to put Dom in an area called Woolwich. I gave him a Woolwich accent, and there were guys I went to school with who I'm sure became chaps like Dom Hemingway, because, well, they were pretty terrifying when I knew them as a boy.
So, when you're a boy going to school with these terrifying guys, do you already know that you're going to be an actor? When did that?
That's why I was terrified of them. I was this pretty blonde kid called Jude who wanted to be an actor, right? Full of enthusiasm about the theatre and films, and I usually got thumped by them. Yeah, I knew pretty at a very young age that it was something I wanted to follow. I had parents who were teachers and who were great enthusiasts for theatre and film, and I grew up being taken to the theatre a lot and going to the cinema a lot, and it was just a passion. I was a real sponge for it. I loved it, and then at the first opportunity as a kid in school, putting on plays, it just felt like a dialogue a place where I was comfortable. I remember putting on plays as a class with the teacher obviously directing and just thinking, this didn't feel like class, this felt like play. And it felt easy, it felt comfortable, I felt at home. And I guess as soon as I made the connection that could also be a job that you would do, it seemed like an obvious direction to go in. And then, the passion takes over when you also realize there's a not serious element, but an element of you can actually have a voice. You can bring a voice to things that you care about, people that you care about, subject matters that you care about.
So, unlike a lot of British actors of your generation, you didn't go to the Royal Academy, you started quite young, actually learning on the job, right?
Yeah. I was a member of the National Youth Music Theatre from the age of 13, which was a company, 12, 13, and we were a company, that was a company that still operates, and we would meet during the holidays and improvise and put on theatre that we would then take to festivals around the country, and then I got offered a job on TV and I left school.
Your parents were okay with that?
They were. As teachers, it was very interesting. I think they knew that it was something I took very seriously, and I think we agreed that if it all went wrong, I agreed that I would go return to my education, and that was it. I didn't really stop. I did an awful lot of theatre first. Film didn't seem like a reality. I would go and see movies all the time, but being a film actor or having a film career just didn't seem realistic in Lewisham. It felt like a distant. It felt like something that happened a lot. Well, it did happen a long, long way away, but it just didn't seem conceivable to get into that world. Whereas theatre, you drive past theatres all the time, as you do here in New York. In London, there they are. So even the idea of going and asking for a job seemed possible, and it felt also that I was following. Not that I did it necessarily consciously, but following in the footsteps of a British tradition of cutting my teeth on the stage, and I'm really grateful for that. I feel that it enabled me to become much more aware of the mechanics of being an actor and the demands of being an actor, and also the respect for the process and the craft of being an actor.
Were there people that you took as models? Were there actors that you particularly admired and tried to...
Certainly. As a child, I was a huge fan of Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. I'm going to say all the obvious ones. The greats. And then the generation of British actors ahead of me, people like Gary Oldman, Tim Roth, Daniel Day-Lewis, were huge heroes. Sean Penn. I think the thing I loved about them in particular was the variety of roles they were playing, that none of them seemed to... I remember in one year seeing My Beautiful Laundrette and then Room with a View, and I just couldn't believe it was the same actor who had done both, and having that in mind, the opportunity of keeping yourself guessing and keeping your audience guessing as to what you would do next.
And you seem, especially lately, to be sort of making a point of continuing to act on stage, right? It wasn't that...
Well, I love it. It's not making a point. It's a place... I was quite surprised. I think I forgot my mic. I was surprised that I'd left it so long. There was a window at some point, I can't remember, where film work had become available, and suddenly it had been years and years since I'd done a play, and that wasn't through any planning, it was just the way it had been. And I was keen to get back to the theatre, and then it became... And then I think someone approached me with the idea of returning and playing Hamlet, and I was suddenly very scared that actually I'd left it... I didn't want to leave it too late. I didn't want to be an actor playing Hamlet in his mid to late 40s. I thought that, that's too long to leave it. So, and I had such a great time playing that with Michael Grandage directing, that it just reminded me of how much I love that process.
You weren't terrified to be Hamlet?
Of course. But but I'm terrified every time. There's always an interesting journey where you're very excited about the idea, and then the day you say yes, you become immediately regretful. You think, why have I taken this on? I'm gonna fail miserably. And then particularly in rehearsals for a play, you're 2 weeks in, you haven't quite mastered the text, you're still sort of checking, You're trying things out. You're spending your whole time at home pacing around, worrying, running lines, and people are buying tickets, and you suddenly think, this is disaster. Everything, and all you can do is block out the fact that at some point you're going to have to go on stage and perform this, and just follow the process, you know. But what I've realised is that terror, that fear, is why I do it. I mean, there can be no other reason that it's mastering that fear and getting to the point where you think, well, either I'm going to give it my all and I'll fail miserably, and that's fine, at least I've tried, or it's going to be a triumph and it will be a wonderful experience for everyone, you hope.
One of the things that has always fascinated me is the difference between film acting and stage acting. And over the years, I've asked a lot of actors about that, and I've got a million different answers. And I've been told it's all pretty much the same. It's all acting. Oh no, it's night and day. Film is easier, stage is harder. Other way around. What is it for you? What's the difference and what's the appeal?
Well, I think both answers are true. I think they're very similar in ways and incredibly distant. For me, I think the clearest difference is that directing is very much... film is a director's medium. And film usually... Every film to me has something to do with the director that directed it. And theatre is an actor's medium. In that you are, as an actor, allowed through the journey of the rehearsal and then the run of the play, allowed to inhabit and own a part that once the director has left, and I'm not saying you suddenly, put in all the bits that you like that the director told you to stop doing, although, that happens too, there's just a greater sense of freedom that you are in charge of this role at all times and embody it for the entire duration that you're on a stage. Rather than a role being selected by an editor and a director, and if you like, the performance being steered by when and what an audience see because of what makes the final cut. Also, the biggest difference to me is just the relationship with an audience, the magic you feel when you share an experience together, and that can be affected by whether it's, a humid, sticky, hot evening where everyone comes in and it's a hot theatre, or indeed it's a cold, wet night, and that affects this magic that happens, this alchemy that kind of happens across from the stage to the auditorium. And the immediate appeal of that, the immediate sense of whether it's the silence because of a dramatic moment, or the gasp because of a shocking moment, or the laughter because of a humorous moment, and the celebration at the end that everyone's shared in it together. Film has a lot more isolation than that. Sometimes a person won't come up to you for years and say, oh, I saw that film, and suddenly you have an opportunity to engage with your audience member about something that you cared greatly about. Yeah.
Speaking of film directors, you've been around long enough, and that you've worked with practically a who's who of, it's amazing. So I'm going to leave them out, but there's Scorsese and David Russell, Joe Wright, Minghella, Sam Mendes, help me out here.
Lots. Who else? Bill Berg, Mike Nichols.
Right, Mike Nichols, exactly. Yeah. So, do any of them stand out in particular, or particularly memorable, or?
I wish I could get this right. Mike Nichols always said, directors always ask actors what other directors are like, because it's like asking what other people are like.
I interviewed Mike Nichols. I interviewed Mike Nichols.
And directors only ever get to sleep with themselves.
Right.
Yeah, because they're monogamous.
Right.
Yeah. They're all. What's wonderful is that each has their own approach and their own take on the medium and their own requirements of you as an actor. And the joy to me is having the opportunity to kind of morph your process to fit their requirements. And also, as I said before, because to me it's a director's medium, for those observing the director at the helm creating this piece of work, it's also it's like slowly you get to learn who they are and how they handle an extraordinary situation. I mean, on the one hand, it's like being a sort of Roman emperor. You know, bring me 100 flamingos and, more light and, I want a river of blood flowing down, and everyone goes, yes, okay, we can have that tomorrow. And at the other end of the spectrum, they have, 1,000 questions to answer every minute, and it can, crush people. So watching how they handle it is very, very interesting, and draws an awful lot of variety, as you can imagine, out of the individual. But for me, the most exciting element, the most exciting elements are how they collaborate.
Uh-huh. So I've two directors I wanted to specifically ask you about because of the two sort of remarkable performances. One is Joe Wright in Anna Karenina. That was a movie that offended the Tolstoy purists. I thought it was brilliant, and not the least brilliant thing about it was your portrayal of Karenin, which he's in most understandings of the novel. He's just dry as dust. He's boring. He's no wonder she leaves.
Yes.
You
almost in a way in some of the interpretations in other screen versions made to be the bad guy.
Yeah,
actually made to be the man who is getting in the way of the love story.
Right. And your performance, it really changed my reading of the book. He turns out to be sort of uncommonly decent, and he's a little buttoned up, but he's decent. He's humane. There's much more going on there than one ever knew.
I wish I could take credit for that, but that's Tom Stoppard.
Really?
Totally, yeah. I mean, he first of all, he put that on the page in his screenplay, but also then called me and schooled me in his perception of that character, and he felt it was very important that triangle be a triangle. And that Karenin was not, as I just prompted you, the man in the way, but was, in a way, the reminder to Anna that she's making a mistake, that she's going down, that she's seduced to go down the obvious path, the path of
and a reminder to the viewer of the film too. I mean, you see.
And also Tolstoy, let's not forget, was really interested in the decent man, the man bettering his beloved Russia, going out into the Urals and counting sheep, literally, and making sure that everyone was eating and that Mother Russia had some structure to it. Karenin is exactly that. He's actually doing the thankless job. Sure, he's boring, right? And as they describe him, like clockwork. But, he's a good man.
The other movie I wanted to ask you about is a very odd one, which is The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, the Terry Gilliam movie. Terry Gilliam is somebody I've interviewed a couple of times, and he's had this sort of star-crossed career, and this movie in particular, it began with starring Heath Ledger, and Heath Ledger died during the making of it. And so you, Johnny Depp, and Colin Farrell all stepped up and played the Heath Ledger part. It was extraordinary generosity, I thought. And the thing about the movie, you watch it at first, you think, well, that's kind of weird, and then you forget about it, and it works. I mean,
fortunately, because it was a Terry Gilliam film, so I don't think that would work, in almost anyone else's. You're in this sort of incredible fractured world of his Imaginarium. I mean, talk about a film representing a director. Terry's are such a clear, they're like pounds of flesh. They're parts of insights into his extraordinary imagination. It was also eerily apt, I suppose, that when Heath passed away, he had shot only a particular section. The film, if you haven't seen it, takes place in reality, and then there are several scenes once they go through the mirror of Parnassus's Imaginarium. And all the stuff in the mirror hadn't been filmed, so Heath had kind of done the groundwork and created this character who then would take characters or go on these adventures in the Imaginarium. And what became apparent was we could therefore step into his shoes, literally, and finish the piece because I had a relationship with Heath. I don't know that Colin and Johnny did. They certainly had a relationship with
Terry.
Right. And I had a relationship with Terry as well. So it just felt like a very beautiful opportunity to complete something, because we were aware of, as you say, Terry's star-crossed career, and all fans of Terry's work, and also an opportunity to complete a work for a fellow actor who left us, untimely.
So, at this point in your career, presumably you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do. So, what do you look for when somebody comes to you now? What is it?
It's kind of still the same equation, really. The director and what the director's done and what the director hopes to do with the project at hand and the script, the part. I mean, I'm still really excited to try new things and play characters that scare me, as we said before. And what's exciting about getting older is, of course, you get to also retread perhaps characters that you played before but 20 years older, and see, obviously they're not the same characters, but see where they're at now in their life. I think also the pressure of, playing the sort of, obviously the bright young thing is behind you, so you can look more to the, not that characters over the age of 40 suddenly become character roles and not lead roles, but they just become, well, they've lived a little. So I'm just interested and excited to continue stretching myself.
You seem, and maybe it's just an accident, you seem to go back and forth between kind of popular movies, big movies, and then more independent, kind of smaller movies. Is that deliberate, or is it just you just looking for the best part?
I tend to just try and look for the best part. I mean, sometimes, it makes sense. It's a kind of a business decision to keep yourself connected to bankable projects so that you can help bankroll the smaller projects. That just seems to make sense, and I think it's something that most actors and directors or anyone involved in film would agree is necessary to consider.
Our last clip is from a film that I think does both. It's immensely popular and it's a wonderful part. But this is, and I don't know which one. This is one of the Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr. Part of the charm of these movies is the chance to see two world-class actors playing off one another. Does it feel that way when you're doing it?
Yes, they're great fun to make.
Yeah.
He's an extraordinary man, and it was quite interesting because we developed this process of working together, which I have to say obviously involved Guy and the producer Lionel Wagram and Susan Downey and one of the other producers and Robert's wife. But we would take the scenes at hand and we would improvise them and sort of play around, and we would use what we called the Bible of, we had this Conan Doyle Bible which held all these little quotes and one-liners and snippets from all the books that we loved, and replace our dialogue with his, and take more contemporary dialogue and replace it with more period dialogue, and then edit it. And so it was a hugely collaborative experience. But working with Robert is astonishing. I've never known someone come up with so many ideas so quickly and be just fearless in what he was willing to try out. And yeah, sometimes it was a case of just holding on and trying to keep up, and other times it was a case of just being astonished that he was brave enough to come up with an idea that you thought, I don't think that'll work, and he usually did.
Are there going to be any more of them?
We hope so. We were hoping actually to do another this year, but scheduling has not been in our favour, so I think he still has to save the world as Iron Man a couple more times. And then we might do something in 2018. Yeah, but there's certainly an idea. We've been working hard on a really good idea. But of course, at the heart of it all was just, what are these two guys going to do next? You know, we realise when we're working on them, it's not so much about the adventure, it's more about just what situation can we put these bickering couple in.
That's right, they are like a married couple.
Yeah.
They are, it's great.
Well, that's what we realised was so attractive, that whilst they're, you know, under a bullet fire and what have you, they're actually arguing over the washing or who turned the gas off.
Right, yeah. That's great. And meanwhile, you're the Pope, right? Am I right about this?
I am. Pope. Bless you. Well, I was the Pope.
Well, that's done?
I had to give my garments back.
So
we finished filming in February.
It was a mini-series, right?
Yes, it's I think 9-part HBO miniseries written and directed by Paolo Sorrentino, who was the wonderful director behind The Great Beauty and Il Divo. And I don't know how much I can give away because I'm still not sure when it's going to be aired. I believe either end of the year or beginning of next. But it's about it's a fictional piece looking at the life of the first American Pope, who is a young New Yorker called Lenny Belardo, who is also an orphan, and it's about his crisis. It was interesting to tackle. I immediately thought, goodness, what have I got to read to play a pope? So you obviously reach immediately for the Bible, and yet that gives you no guide. Well, it gives you guidance, but not the kind you necessarily need. And then you think, you know, is there a Pope school? Where do I go? Well, I didn't know where to start. And Paolo said a very interesting thing, which was that, you know, it's about the man. So in fact, it was more about creating a real man. And because it's really about this individual's dilemma, and he happens to be the Pope. So that's where we started. But it was a wonderful piece and wonderful to work with Paolo.
I think we have some time for some questions, and I've also got some questions from the internet, or Facebook, I'm sorry. The way the questions work is, I think they're going to have microphones, and you need to, if you want to have a question, you need to come down and speak into the microphone. So meanwhile they're getting ready, here's one from Facebook. What was the toughest character you've played to date?
I think I would probably put Karenin up there. Well, I mean, Hamlet was a challenge.
Right.
But on film, Karenin, because Joe had such a clear sense of him being this contained, emotional swallowing kind of ghost of a man, and I think I have a tendency to want to take my characters on a clear emotional journey, and Joe's idea was always to really restrain, and the restraint was complex and hard.
Question there?
Jude.
Hello there,
It's
how are you?
Dolores, hi darling. Jude, 3 times I crossed the pond to see you in Hamlet,
I know.
Anna Christie, and Henry V. I'm pushing 88 years. Will you bring Obsession to Broadway and save me the energy, my love, my beautiful love?
Well,
I beg of you. I want to live to see it.
That's a perfect reason to bring it.
No, seriously, Jude, do you think there's a chance you'd bring it to
I
Broadway?
certainly think there is a chance, yeah.
God love you.
I certainly think there's a chance. We're already going, so we start that in London at the Barbican.
Yes.
We do 3 very short trips around Europe. We go to Amsterdam. This is a production I'm doing with Ivo von Hove, who
Have you
currently
worked with him
has.
before?
I haven't, no.
His Crucible on Broadway now
Yes,
is just amazing.
and he did a wonderful production of View from the Bridge.
absolutely.
And,
Just saw them both.
spectacular.
Saw
Yeah,
them
he's
both.
brilliant.
Marvelous.
So
But
I'm
this-
pretty sure we will.
You haven't
we'll
worked with
bring
him
it
before,
here.
though?
I've not worked with him before. No, he approached me last year and had this idea of taking Visconti's Obsession and putting it on stage as only he could. So
Jude,
I
darling, do
will
it for me.
promise you now, I will work as hard as possible
Before
to
I
bring it
hit
over.
90, darling.
I promise.
Question over here?
It's lovely to see you. It's a good reason to come.
What? Good reason to come.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm not sure if you're aware that Wild had a huge impact on the gay community here in New York.
No.
Huge. And
I'm glad.
I just wonder, I know it's a while ago, but what was it like for you at that point in your career to be playing a character that I mean, we talked earlier about, being cast for physical beauty, but also the emotional depths that this man, and the kind of size of the character.
Yeah.
That was an awfully huge thing for someone so young to be tackling. Could you talk a little bit about what that was like?
At the time, all those elements were what excited me. And I was fascinated by him because on the one hand, you had Oscar and the majority of the piece talking about this, how exquisite this young boy was and beautiful and like an angel and untouched. And yet everything I read about him, and indeed history, which speaks louder than anything, made it very clear that he was the most poisonous, nasty, talentless little imp, I think, in literary history. Actually, I was just remembering today, someone gave me a book of his poems as a gift, and they are atrocious. Terrible. And yet he had the audacity to try and stall Oscar Wilde's publications because he said that, he needed to have the spotlight for a while. But as a young actor, it was, I'll be honest, I look back, I was, I think, 24 when I played Bosie, and there was a certain amount of blind fearlessness, but the challenges were what really excited me, I think. And I was also very aware that it was a great opportunity to put this, although it was sadly tragic, but this great love story on film for possibly the first time, and also honestly, where we could show their physical love, their physical attraction, and the physical world, the sexual world that Oscar inhabited in London, albeit behind closed doors and illicit. It felt incredibly important to put all of that out there. So I'm thrilled that you say that it had that relevance.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a question from Facebook. Do you ever think about directing yourself? And if you were going to direct, is there anything that you would want to try?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot, and more so recently. And there's a project I have in mind. It's more a case of not finding the time because I'm terribly busy, but finding the time when I know that it's in the right shape and I'm in the right shape, and it's a complicated process. But the more I kind of dwell on it, the more, first of all, I'm certain it's something I want to do, and the more I remind myself to get a move on and just do it. The one thing I hear is that it is always the most wonderful experience, terrifying but wonderful. So I'm certainly curious to move into that area. Yes.
Okay, first off, I wanted to say that I think you're one of the most charming British actors I have ever had the pleasure of meeting.
Thank you.
And speaking on the movie Genius, even though
I would say charming, we could take British out. We could just say, don't you think? In my role as editor, I'm going to delete.
All right, you do that. Right, and speaking on the movie Genius, even though you play an editor, did you ever have a favorite book from either Hemingway or Fitzgerald?
Did I ever have a
favorite book?
A favorite book? I'm not an editor in it. I play a writer.
All right, okay,
Colin plays the editor. But yes, The Beautiful and the Damned, I think, is my favorite Fitzgerald. Hemingway, my favorite Hemingway. Gosh. I think possibly The Sun Also Rises.
All right.
Here's another one from Facebook, which asks, talking about your role in Spy, when you play the straight man to Melissa McCarthy, and whether you, and it sort of ties in a little bit to the Watson character. Do you think about doing more comedy?
Yeah. It's not necessarily something, because I haven't because I haven't played an out-and-out comedic role, it's not something that comes my way. I don't think people would read a comedic script, and very often nowadays, comedies are, what's the word? They're sort of created from source by the lead comedian, right. Who goes, do you know what I mean? It becomes a vehicle, that's the word.
You don't think of Dom Hemingway as a comedy?
I suppose Dom Hemingway is a comedy of sorts, yeah. And I like to think of, there are a lot of Sherlock Holmes that has comedy in it. Right. A part I really want to play on stage is Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing. I love the last scene in Henry V. There's there's a huge comedic scene at the end of Henry V, the wooing scene with Princess Catherine, and I loved it every night. It was a great sort of breath, release. So yeah, I'm always looking for different challenges.
We only have questions on this side, I guess.
Hi, Jude.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. My question for you is, what is your advice for upcoming or new actors?
I always say, no matter, getting your foot in the door and getting professional work is always hard. So in a way, what I'm going to say may sound like the obvious or also the impossible, but keep doing it is really important. What I mean by that is, even if you're not getting the professional work, look for productions, look for the opportunity to continue to act. And only then, first of all, you're flexing that muscle, you're exercising that muscle that you are passionate about. You're constantly learning. It's constantly an opportunity for people to see you. And there are always things going on. There are always people doing stuff. And don't be embarrassed about writing. I wrote endless letters to directors, to both just saying what I was doing, asking to meet them, and if you write enough letters, you end up getting the opportunity to meet people. I got replies from, I have memories of various directors in theatres and so on around London who were generous enough to meet me and guide me, and I mean all of that just keeps the opportunity, the belief that something will happen and can happen alive.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good luck.
Hello. What would you say is one of your craziest and most unexpected lessons that you've learned over the course of your career?
About work.
Yeah.
Gosh. Craziest lesson. That's tricky.
Or the toughest?
Yeah. I think it's the I don't know that crazy is a tricky one to put into, I suppose, referencing Robert Downey again, the idea of keeping yourself away from the obvious. The obvious is always glaring you in the face. And it's kind of what everyone's expecting you to do, it's what you're expecting to do, and it's a safe place to go. And eventually, if all your ideas run out, you're going to end up going there anyway. So I suppose the lesson is to keep yourself, keep challenging yourself. And I mean in the moment, whether it's a choice in a scene, whether it's in a part you take, what you say no to, what you say yes to. Do you see what I mean? It's constantly keep yourself guessing, because the obvious path will always be there to tread. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi.
Hello.
First of all, I really loved you in Enemy at the Gates, which for some reason people in the States don't always talk about.
Thanks.
But I have a weird question, I guess. I was wondering if you ever did voiceover for like a feature animated film, and if you would consider doing it.
I did. I've done it a couple of times. I did it once for a little kids film called Rise of the Guardians, in which I played the bad guy. Much to the horror of my sister's youngest son, who loved that film. I think he was like 4 when it came out and hated that character. And my sister couldn't tell him that it was her uncle's voice because she was very scared that he'd never let me back into the house at Christmas. And then I was just part of a really eccentric and exciting project that Ezra Koenig, who's the lead singer of Vampire Weekend, he wrote and conceived this animated series that's about to start, I believe, on Netflix, called Neo Yokio. Have you heard about it?
Yes.
Yeah, I played. So I think Jaden Smith is playing this little boy called Kai in it, and I'm his butler. I'm this kind of huge robot butler called Charles, who is also a rocket ship. And it takes place in a New York that is sort of combined with Tokyo in the future.
Thank you.
So the last question. The last question from Facebook are, what are Mr. Law's plans for dinner? But how can you be asking that on Facebook? You're going to have dinner on Facebook? I don't understand. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.